Hey everyone, it's Stephanie and welcome back to my channel. So today I have yet another extremely late book review for George Eliot's Romola. This was George Eliot's favorite of her books. Of the three that I have read, this was the most labor intensive, but one of the most rewarding that I've read. This opens when a young Grecian, Tito, washes up on shore after a shipwreck in Florence, and he's very well-dressed and handsome and charming, but no one knows who he is. And through a series of circumstances, he becomes entangled with Romola and her father, who is a blind scholar, and working on his life's work and trying to get that done before he passes. And we meet Romola, and she is just very good and wants to just better herself and become a better person. And we also meet Tessa, who's very simple but sweet, and Tito is basically in the middle between Tessa and Romola, and he has to make a decision. Not only do we have that kind of love triangle, we also have the political backdrop of 1400s Florence, and that in itself weaves into the plot and intertwines with all these character plots in such an interesting way. So we also follow Savonarola, and he was this religious figure who was critiquing the political and religious establishments and the corruption in the clergy at the time. Florence is kind of in an uproar because the Medicis have been expelled from power, and Savonarola kind of sweeps in and rises to power, which terrified those in power, but he was critiquing those in power. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And all of these plot threads end up weaving together, and it was such a well-done story. It's kind of hard to give a really good plot synopsis without spoilers, but I think that's because this book is so much more than the plot itself. This was her most philosophical, symbolic, most religious of her novels. And so not only do we have the basic plot, we have the exploration of corruption and power and clergy and deep philosophical discussions of what's going on at the time. And it's just fascinating. I would recommend reading a little bit about this time before you start this. I read, what's it called? Death in Florence by Paul Strathern. I forget the subtitle of the book, but it was really good, and it gave me some background that helped me follow the political part a little bit more and allowed me to really be a little bit more comfortable while reading this, because it's very deep. It has a lot of symbolism, and I feel like I just scratched the surface. And I feel like this is one of those books that I have to read multiple times and that I'll get something out of it each time. But so rewarding. So I think I took about 2 months to read this. I do not recommend reading this on audiobook. I tried for a little bit and I just missed so much. So I think this is a book that you definitely need to read physically so that you can get a lot of the political and the setting, because it's just so important to the story and her overall message. But I really thought, I had never heard of Savonarola before I heard about this book, and I ended up doing, just some reading about him in general, and he's such an interesting person. I'm not a religious person, but religious zealots or, huge religious figures just fascinate me. And I think religion is just really interesting. And I think it's also interesting that George Eliot was not a religious person, and she was critical of the church in that the people in power and their corruption. She always writes religion in such a fascinating way, despite not being religious herself. And so I just really enjoyed reading about Savonarola and Romola and Savonarola's relationship, and how he really just influenced her life. And, it's like, don't focus on pitying yourself, don't focus on your circumstances, focus on others who need you. And so then she just devotes her life to helping others and eventually becomes viewed as like a saint. And I just thought that exploration and that viewpoint was just really interesting. The characterization in this book is so good. Tito is really interesting. He starts off as very charming and handsome, and just everybody loves him, but he's very duplicitous and he always takes the easy road out. He makes very bad choices, and it just leads to him just being a bad person, versus Romola, who's on the other end of the spectrum. She's very introspective and is always critiquing herself because she wants to be a better person and continue becoming a better person. And she helps others so much, and she's so unselfish. So the dynamic between them was really interesting to read about. You can just tell this was so well researched. The art, the culture, the church history was so in-depth. Again, I feel like I'd have to read this multiple times just to catch everything. But it's just so well done, and she really makes you feel like you're in Renaissance Florence, and her imagery and her writing made it so easy to visualize the city and the characters and what was going on in the story. And it was just so hard to put down, and it's so dense that I needed to put it down. It was good to slowly read it, but I didn't want to stop reading it because I was just fascinated. It's one of those that I read it and finished it at the beginning of this year, and I think about it a lot. It definitely has staying power. It was a labor of love. And again, like I said, the plot is just the tip of the iceberg with the story. So this has kind of been a meandering review, but it's just so good. And it's so worth the labor that you put into it, because the reward is so great. And her writing is so lovely, and there were scenes in this book that just made me tear up because they were so beautiful or so beautifully written. And I am just continually in awe of George Eliot and the way she writes. And the more I read of her, the more I just love her, and she's definitely become a favorite author of all time. This book is just so ambitious, and she pulled it off so well. So have you read this book? If so, please let me know. I had never heard of this book until BookTube, which I think is really sad, because I think Middlemarch is probably her most lauded book for good reason. But I feel like this is an underrated masterpiece, and more people should definitely read it, especially if you're interested in Renaissance Florence or church politics or church history. I think this would be right up your alley. If you'd like to leave an emoji, leave some kind of wave or ocean emoji down below. As always, if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and click the subscribe button if you'd like. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.